Keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast on our Instagram handle at the Wolf Connection Pod, or email us your questions, comments, and guest ideas to podcast@wolfconnection.org. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. So we talked to another table that was set up at the Natural History Museum a month or so ago already when we were working with Ronan Donovan and his awesome exhibit. And we are really privileged to have two postdoctoral researchers for the California Wolf Project here to go in depth about what's happening with that project. Obviously, those of you that are listening here have seen that wolves are really starting to recolonize the state. And so really excited to have these two gentlemen on to talk about the work that's happening here. We have Matt Hyde and we have Mauriel Rodriguez. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you both here to talk about this stuff. How are you doing, Matt?
Thanks, John. Doing well. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here. Excited to talk to you guys about California wolves.
Absolutely. Mauriel, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Also really excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And yeah, looking forward to sharing at least any little tidbit that I can share with you guys.
I mean, little tidbits are all that we ask for. You know, it's obviously research is, it's always an ongoing process. And just whoever can, well, I'll start with, we'll go back and forth here, as we say, with whenever we have multiple guests on, it's nice to bounce back and forth. So Mauriel, let me start with you. What's the journey been like for you? I know you're coming to us from Utah, so you're not in the state of California right now, but what led you down this path to eventually end up at California Wolf Project and working with this species in particular?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. I never saw myself really working with large carnivores. I went to university in New Mexico, and I was mostly working with small rodents at the time. And I got in touch with a postdoc that was working in the lab, and he said I should go down to Argentina and start doing some field work with mountain lions. And I reached out to the PI, and he said, yeah, come on down. You just have to get down here and you can do some work. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with just being out in the field and kind of chasing these big cats around. And then since then, I did my master's and PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and mostly studying smaller carnivores, foxes, martens, things like that are like usually what larger carnivores tend to either pick on or they subsidize through the carrion that they leave on the landscape. And all that I studied was basically just those interactions within carnivores, and never really saw myself as a large carnivore ecologist. And I was always kind of either intimidated or put off a little bit by some of the stories that you hear about folks in that field, in this field, I guess, that I'm in. But I had done some work previously with Arthur Middleton, and when they were hiring for a postdoc, I reached out and he said I should apply, that I would be a really good fit for the position, because they were hoping to not have those traditional large carnivore people working on the project. They wanted to expand and have people that are thinking more broadly about, what's going on in the ecosystem, what's going on with the people on the ground, what's going on with something other than just this one species that's potentially really important, but they wanted to have like a very comprehensive understanding. And so I think mostly through serendipity is how I ended up working in the California Wolf Project.
That's so cool. Before I get to you, Mauriel, just describe a little bit what you mean by the broader view of ecology, because this is where Stephen and I are really starting to dip our toes in a little bit more when we talk about not just the wolf itself, but everything surrounding it, including those larger carnivores, but everything that going down to the blades of grass. So why is it so important to have this broad perspective and this broad view on ecology?
Yeah, totally. I think of myself, or I like to dabble a little bit in more of these like theoretical questions of what ecology is. every species that's on the landscape is connected somehow. One way or another, they're going to be connected either directly or indirectly. And those indirect interactions tend to be really important for structuring or for shaping how communities of different species, how these communities, how we see them on the landscape. So those indirect interactions are really important. And I think that the vision within the California Wolf Project before its inception was bringing folks along that are thinking a little bit more broadly to consider, what those potential indirect impacts might be. The work that I've done has been on smaller carnivores mostly, and we tend to see a lot of indirect effects from those larger apex carnivores like wolves or mountain lions. They tend to have some sort of fear responses to them, so they're avoiding them in space. They're avoiding them in the times of day that they're active, and those shifts in their behaviors ultimately alter what their interactions are with their prey, with the species that they interact with on a day-to-day basis. And so thinking that each of those species that we kind of look at have their own effects on their prey or whatever they're eating, makes us think that we need to consider things that are more broadly, things that are broader than just like a single species view.
What's an example of that kind of dynamic where apex predators are affecting, like you said, smaller predators or mesopredators or whatever?
Yeah. So I did a lot of my PhD work in Isle Royale, and we were looking at how foxes respond to the wolf reintroduction out there. So in 2018, wolves are reintroduced to the landscape. The National Park Service brought 19 wolves in, and we were just seeing how foxes would alter their behaviors, would alter their diets after this reintroduction. And one thing that we see is that they shift their diets. They start consuming more carrion as carrion becomes more available on the landscape. So that frees up some potential predation onto snowshoe hares that are one of the primary prey items for foxes out there. The foxes also shifted to be closer to where campsites are now, Royal. So they were eating more foods from different from people that are on the landscape. They're just basically changing, everything about what their behavior is following then that wolf introduction. And so following kind of like the links down the chain is kind of the best way to exemplify that, I guess.
That's pretty wild.
That's cool.
Matt, what about you? I guess top that. No, I'm just kidding. Just give us
No, I can't.
No, just your background too. How did you get involved in this, and what's your? I think you guys both similarly studying ecology, I believe, right? But I don't know if you have a little bit of a different take from Mauriel.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so I didn't have a sort of a natural path into the carnivore ecology world. When I was studying my undergrad, I was not involved in ecology or biology in any way. I was actually interested in agricultural geography. And I was really interested in mapping and agriculture and really into community engagement and thinking about like ways how we can inform food policy and like work on natural resource management around agriculture. And after college, I went into the Peace Corps in Mexico. And, there's a lot of different reasons that people go into the Peace Corps. Like some people think they're going to save the world. Some people are looking for like a change in themselves. And I was neither one of those groups. I was actually just like somebody that wanted to get out of Illinois, but didn't have the money to do so. So I ended up in Mexico. And, at first they told me that I was going to be basically mapping in a national park. That was like how they sold it to me. And it was a little bit of a bait and switch situation. I actually ended up in a huge office at the National Forestry Commission working on payments for ecosystem services, which is basically, paying landowners or communities to conserve forests. And this was a really cool opportunity that totally opened up my worldview. I hadn't thought about conservation really at all. And I got exposed to these awesome biologists that were working on conservation in Mexico and doing really cool things and really committed to community development there. And I got involved in this program that did payments for ecosystem services, but focused on biodiversity and specifically focused on habitats where jaguars were. And so, I started helping on this program, and I was like really excited, but not about the jaguar part. I was excited about the community engagement part. Like I wanted to be on the ground with communities working to think about like natural resource management and like how maps could be a tool to help inform, their management plans going forward. Because in Mexico, they have this really cool system of land tenure called an ejido, which is like each person gets their parcel, but there's this communal land that people can use for certain things, but they can't touch, they can't sell. And that's where you see a lot of this biodiversity and these ecosystem services that come from it. And so we got some trail cameras and we started putting them up with the communities and trained people in the communities to do this. And, this for me, this was like, oh, this is cool, but not my thing. And so I saw the first photo of this like jaguar walking across this burnt forest, like in the middle of the day. And I was like, from that moment, I was just kind of hooked. See, like jaguars are really cool cats, right? And just, they seem so mysterious, and it was just so big in that first picture that I was wowed. And I just kept going down that path. But like my career has always been focused on the community engagement aspect as much as the large carnivore piece since then. So after that, I ended up moving to Colombia, and after a small foray back into the agricultural world, moved back again to jaguar conservation. And I was working on conflict mitigation and population type stuff for jaguars. And when I started looking for a PhD, I wasn't looking for wolves necessarily, but that's what ended up coming up, the opportunity that opened up to me. And I was lucky enough to be part of this really cool project across the Western U.S. Called the Conflict on Working Lands Conservation Innovation Grant. And so we worked between a bunch of researchers, universities, so people from Colorado State, Utah State, Montana State, a bunch of NGOs across the West, researchers from Wildlife Services, all working together to evaluate non-lethal tools to reduce conflicts with wolves and grizzly bears. And so this was a big collaborative project and really changed the way that I thought about doing research around carnivores, and really like brought back that community-centered approach for me. And then when I heard about this project, I was like, this sounds right up my alley. This sounds like kind of what I want to do, and got off the ground with it.
As I said to Mauriel, just expand about what you're bringing to this angle, because you talk about community outreach, you talk about conflict mitigation, and we've discussed these things at length on our podcast. What are the tools that you brought with you from your different stops along the way that now you're bringing to this specific project, and the knowledge that you can give to other folks as you navigate this particular species in this particular state now here in the West?
Yeah. Well, as you guys know, wolves can be a little controversial. And, a lot of the issues that I've dealt with in other communities too is like they can be equally controversial. I think the two things that I think are important are just like listening, like bringing in the skills of just like sitting back and realizing like, accepting that I don't know, and that it's a new system, and I don't know anything about ranching in California. I don't know anything about the experience that ranchers are having living with wolves there. I don't know anything about California wolves. That really, at this point, we're just starting this project, getting off the ground. And so just taking that moment to just like settle in and just hear what people have to say, and learn as much as I can, I think is a really important part. And then the other part of that community engagement is just trying to sort of like be flexible and like get into that community and take the time to do it, rather than coming in with ideas of how we're going to mitigate conflicts. As I'm sure you guys have heard, there's no one size fits all to mitigating conflicts with wolves or, coexistence. It's all about finding locally adapted solutions that people are willing to do, that people think will work in their system, and that are culturally relevant to them. And that takes time to figure out what that's going to be.
It seems like these two, both of your skill sets, when we talk about the ecology part of it, Mario, when you're talking about looking at all the links in the chain, and then Matt, with you taking the community-based approach because of where you've been before, what attracted you? I know you kind of said why you came to this. I'll go to you, Mario, and then I'll come back to Matt. Why did you feel this was a perfect fit, or a fit that you were willing to take a chance on for this with your background?
Yeah, totally. One of the things that I've also hoped with throughout my one of the things that I've always hoped to do throughout my PhD and my master's was fit people into the picture. So we are just another one of those links in these food chains, in these food webs, and we have impacts on wildlife. We have impacts on other species, and those other species have impacts on us. And I've always kind of looked to humans as having this kind of unidirectional impact on other species. And I remember during my master's, I was doing work in Argentina, and I came in to the work just thinking like, we need to get these people out of here. I did my master's in this small sheep ranching community in the northern Patagonia, and like, man, this is a national park. Why are there people in this national park? Why are we protecting this grazing lands for these sheep ranchers? And I think my position completely flipped by the time I was out there, because I was engaging with the people on the landscape, and I was beginning to see that those interactions were kind of two-way. They not only were they out there, and they were actively hunting mountain lions and pursuing them. They had extirpated folks in this area, had extirpated guanacos, which would have been the native prey for mountain lions years ago. And all that was left were these sheep. And so, of course, there was this conflict between the people and the mountain lions. And I started thinking a lot more about what the impacts are from these larger species on the people, rather than just thinking, one way of what the impacts of these people are on these species that we think are important or we want to protect. And I think bringing that into the work that I did in my PhD, which was completely non-consumptive and there's no hunting whatsoever, but just looking at how people change the behaviors of different species, and how excited people get in return when they're like seeing these animals on the landscape, and maybe just really want to just think about more broadly about what those real conflicts might be and how we can potentially get to some sort of coexistence. I always imagined that I would try to kind of not necessarily solve any problem about or any issue about how these two different entities can work and fit in this puzzle, but at least try to understand and understand what the levers are that we can pull to try and get to some level of acceptance and just coexistence, really.
So you're both just kind of stressing the importance of community outreach or conversations with the community, just as sort of as an integral part of wildlife issues and common ground and all of that. So what are the mediums that the California Wolf Project, I guess, utilizes to interact with communities that live with wolves in California? Or how do you guys expect to sort of facilitate this conversation or these conversations, or create the opportunities for them to be had?
Yeah, well, there's a couple ways. Like we said, we're just starting to get off the ground, but the ways that we've envisioned how we're going to communicate with people is, one, having really transparent sharing of the practices that we're doing, what kind of research are we doing, and communicate those results in a digestible way, and try to think about, what does our studies mean? What do our studies mean for communities in California? And that's not just ranching communities. It's also urban communities, people throughout California. Why would our studies be interesting or impactful for people? And then another way is trying to have in-person meetings in areas that are living with wolves, and just putting ourselves out there and talking about our research. And one of the ways is trying to create a two-way street on the research. So, as the California Wolf Project, some of the work that we're doing is directly associated with, our contract with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Other stuff is things that we want to start getting going like down the road, and we want to hear from people. What are the things that they are seeing on the ground, and what do they think would be interesting to research, so that we can set that priority and start to work with people to develop those research questions. I think that's really important. And hearing what people say already about, practices that could work to mitigate conflicts or impacts that they might be seeing already on wildlife, including like what Mauriel was talking about with mesocarnivores and maybe coyotes starting to be suppressed by wolf presence. Like, people are seeing that stuff on the ground. It's not just something that you see from cameras. And so, you can start to get the sense of that and get an idea from those people what we could work on and start doing it with them.
Just to tack on, I think through our bosses, through their vision that they've had on like shaping this California Wolf Project, it's been at least a 4-year kind of trying to get this project off the ground. And they have a really, long view vision, a long-term vision for this project. And the only way that that's going to work is by collaborating with people on the ground, by having these conversations, by bridging some of any gap that there might be, by trying to just inform people and have them come to the table together. So I really kind of see the project as being a facilitator for these broader conversations that have either not been had, or there's a lot of resistance to have between different stakeholders, between different people. I think in the very first meeting that we had with Dr. Arthur Middleton and Dr. Justin Brashears, who are the PIs on this project, we sat down and just riffed for about a couple of hours at least on what the long view of this project is, and what the what service we're really trying to provide, not just the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, but also the people that are on the ground. So it's been really centered around the people from the beginning.
Yeah. When we're talking about, so obviously there's the people part of it. Are either of you involved, or is this another section of, like you said, the stakeholders? Because when I looked it up, there's obviously California Department of Fish and Wildlife, National Geographic Society. There's a lot of different folks involved. Are you guys involved in the research end of it, meaning collecting data, research, plugging it into a spreadsheet, what other places do? Or are you guys more on, like you say, the mitigation ecology side? Like where do you guys sit, both of you, in sort of this chain link of this ecological thing that you guys are now a part of? I'll start with Matt. I'll go with you, Matt, and then we'll go to Mauriel.
We're all over. So I guess our team, we're a small team trying to punch above our weight. So we're in on the data stuff. Everything from organizing how we're going to collect the data, the protocols, collecting that data, inputting the data, running analyses, and at the same time, as we distribute tests amongst ourselves, we're all involved in communications and working with stakeholders. And there's some nuance to that where one of us might have more of a role in some tasks than others, but we're definitely all involved. And so, like, our positions, we're really involved in the science and the research part. That's the majority of our job. But since we're both, the two of us and the team in general is so committed to this community aspect, we try to make that a priority too. And so we, as a team, have dedicated a lot of thought to that, and what's the long view, and how do we keep working and sharing information and receiving information.
Right. When I was just talking about even applying for this position with my PhD advisor, we talked a lot about like what a traditional postdoc is. And usually postdocs, at least in our field in ecology, you go to this fancy university and they have a data set for you, and you sit behind a computer and you analyze the data, you publish the papers, and you move on, you're gone. And from the very beginning, it was very clear that this was going to be boots on the ground, launching a project from the very beginning. And so we have this awesome, an awesome team, but we also have this awesome opportunity to shape the project into what we want it to be, or what we kind of hope for it to be in the future. And so having those conversations with Arthur and Justin about what the long view of the project is, but also being on the ground and kind of being able to shape and like, push it along into what we think the long view of the project is too, and has been really cool. Has been, it's been really rewarding in the sense of like, we all have a stake in this. So it's not just that we're here. We do work remotely, but we're not just here behind a computer analyzing data and crunching numbers. We're trying to really provide a service and be on the ground from the get-go with the project.
Yeah. I see a list of research objectives on the website, but just wondering if you guys can sort of summarize that for listeners and discuss how they all work together.
So the California Wolf Project, we're basically dedicated to look at social and ecological aspects of wolf recolonization. So one of the main ones is, how are wolves using space? And like, what is the space that they're using? What types of habitats? What resources are they selecting along the way? And thinking about how that could help us think about where wolves are going to be. That's an important aspect of it, because obviously, as we've discussed, wolves are quickly recolonizing. We've seen that big jump in the population, and they're going to continue to expand around the state. And so understanding what kind of habitats they're using is pretty important to do that. And thinking with such a big state, and with as much area and human resources that you need in order to as much human resources that you need to look at that area, understand where wolves could be is really, really fundamental. Another aspect that Mauriel is in charge of, that I do not know very much about, is kill rates and prey and diet of wolves. So what are they eating? How often? And we're doing that a couple ways. So we're looking at kill clusters. So a couple times a year, we're using GPS collars to help us identify where they're killing prey, and visiting those sites, checking what's there and whether it was kills or scavenging events. And then also collecting scats to use in metabarter coding to understand diets. And then Mauriel and I are working together to understand occupancy of wolves. So sort of what kind of habitats are they using, and then using that data to make predictive models, again, for where they're going to be. And then sort of doing the same. So earlier we were talking about mesocarnivores, and there's other competitors on the landscape too, like mountain lions, black bears, and there's plenty of native prey, right? We've got like mule deer, all kinds of other smaller animals, black-tailed deer, elk. And so we're looking at their space use as well, using trail cameras, and looking at their space use and how they might have behavioral changes that are related to wolves coming in. So like trying to look also at before and after. Before wolves come in, what are they doing? And then what might they be doing after? I feel like I'm droning on because there's like 7 of them, going in order. Mauriel, jump in if you want to.
It's all good.
Yeah, the last 2 objectives are kind of really spearheaded by Matt and the other postdoc on the project, Kagi Oric. We're going to be looking at livestock depredation patterns. So anytime that a rancher reports some livestock loss, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife goes out and does a report on whether it was a confirmed wolf attack, or if it was a different species, what signs of different carnivores they see on the landscape. So we're going to be using that information to kind of learn something about where we see wolf depredations on cattle on the landscape, and what other carnivores are potentially associated with those depredations. And then we're also going to be evaluating a compensation program that California rolled out a couple of years ago. So in, I think, 2022, California had a 3-prong approach to compensation for cattle losses. They did pay for presence. So they were trying to map wolf distributions on the landscape. And if someone's land happened to occupy the area that wolves were in, they would they would pay some money to those ranchers. They would also do direct loss. So you could submit a report to California Fish and Wildlife, and they would send you, your financial loss. And then they also had some programs to help with deterrence for carnivores. So things like fladgery, range riding, acoustic devices to scare wolves off, basically. And so we're going to be reaching out to different ranchers and just seeing how that program went. Matt put together an awesome questionnaire and interview or survey to kind of gauge how the program was and how effective it was, and what people generally thought of it. And I think the idea is that California is going to be doing this kind of compensation well into the future. And we recently learned that they approved kind of external funding to be a part of the source. So they have a total of $600,000 right now that folks on the ground can actually apply to I think mostly for direct loss, but they're hoping to kind of expand that out and build some partnerships with other entities that can provide more funds.
So I know all of this is completely new for the California Wolf Project, but are you guys pulling from any other substantial body of work or research that was already completed in the past that relates to these objectives? Or how much of this research is kind of done and done versus not really tapped into and starting with you guys?
A lot of it has been started. California Department of Fish and Wildlife has done an amazing job doing a lot of this before. They've been doing the wolf monitoring for the last 13 years since wolves were first reappeared in California. And when we're talking about competitor species like black bears, mountain lions, or prey like ungulates, elk and deer, they have teams that are working on that. And we're collaborating closely with those teams to try to use data sets that already exist, and also just use some of that expertise to inform how we're going to do things. That's really important. Learning from them because they've been on the ground in California. And then obviously, wolves are probably the most studied terrestrial species in the world. There's a lot of studies on wolves out there and how wolves might be behaving, ecology, habitat use, etc. But studying it in California is still equally as important, even if there's a lot of stuff that we know about wolves in, say, Wyoming. How they're going to behave in California could be pretty different. And then also there are quite a few studies talking about mitigation, conflict mitigation across the West. But like I said, having it be adaptive is really important, and just locally grounded. And one of the really cool things, I just wanted to jump on what Mario said about compensation. And California piloted a program that didn't just include paying ranchers for losses, which has been the case in a lot of other places. And a lot of ranchers are not reporting their losses. So even if compensation is available, they don't want to.
Right. They
don't want to apply for compensation necessarily. It might not be worth their time, or they might not find the animal with enough sign to say that it was a wolf, because it was a couple of days later. But they had to pay for presence, which is a really cool idea. It's basically saying, we know there are indirect losses that come from living with wolves, and it's hard to quantify those losses, but we're going to try to do it by paying a certain amount of money for that. And that's a really cool idea. In Montana, I think they showed that a wolf that was in a herd of where they had a depredation was on average 22 pounds lighter, right? 22 pounds lighter than herds that don't have depredations. And so, you can lose money a lot of ways than with wolves. It's not just about direct losses. So California did a really cool job of addressing that.
Yeah. It does seem like they're trying to jump ahead of the curve with taking all the research and all the stuff that's being done in the other Western states and bringing it here. As you said, this is building off the ground. Were there any, I don't want to say differences, are there any things that you all agreed on for the long-term projection of the project? In other words, you're looking 5 years down the line. Are there some things you guys can share with us that I guess are mutually agreed upon? And obviously we know research and things bend and flex as we move along, but what are maybe one or two key things long term that the project is hoping to achieve as we get to, that point eventually?
It's a good question because like we're hopefully, I mean, maybe we're hopefully not going to be here, in that horizon, in that like 5-year horizon. Who knows? Maybe we'll be just like kicking around, but one of the really big questions that have been proposed is trying to understand why California has some of the lowest densities of deer, elk, and other potential prey species for wolves.
Interesting.
We've been talking about how we can potentially address that, and we were talking earlier about some of those links in the chain, and one of the hypotheses that have been projected is that the abundances of mesocarnivores like coyotes and abundances of bears and mountain lions is so abnormally high in California that they're creating what's known as a predator pit. Freaking cool terminology, right? They're creating a predator pit for deer.
Like a mosh pit.
Like a mosh pit. Yeah. So like if you go in there as a prey animal, it's just gonna
Someone type that into AI and give us a visual of that.
Oh my God.
So there's this hypothesis about a predator pit formed in California where these higher abundances of coyotes and bears and potentially mountain lions are suppressing deer abundances and potentially elk abundances. And just seeing how wolves will impact that dynamic, if they will, is definitely one of those like 5-10 year long view type questions that we'd hope to really begin unpacking.
Right, because elk numbers have gone up, but they were reintroductions, or
I'm trying to remember what the deal was.
I think there was a little bit of both. I think there have been some reintroductions, but some of the numbers stayed. There were resident elk, but I believe I don't know. This is one of those things where I feel like I could totally get wrong. But we just don't see the abundance of elk like there are in other Western states, and I think that's one of the big questions when it comes to wolves.
Yeah. I mean, for what more on the, I guess less on the long term, but more on the short term, because Mauriel, I guess we'll put your, because you're like, we're not going to be, guys sitting in rocking chairs doing this for the next 20 years. Not that you guys will be that old. I'm just saying. Anyway, for the short term, while you and Matt are both here, what are you both hoping to influence or use your expertise for while you're here at the project? Because obviously, as we know in science and in research, people cycle in and out. It kind of depends. There are some long-term cast of characters that are in certain spots for a while. But while you both are here, what are the main things you're trying to achieve? And like you say, unlock what's the burning question either of you want to unlock while you're here?
Or that wolf connection, we call it what's your legacy project?
There you go.
Yeah.
I like that. Nice tie-in. What's your legacy project? We'll start with
If
Matt.
you had to
What's
leave
your
in a
legacy?
year and you wanted to leave on a good note, what would be the thing that would have been accomplished?
Wow.
Yeah,
that's quite the question. I never think about my legacy. I'm not that old. Like, what do I want to leave to this world? But I think there's a couple of things that come to mind right away. One of them is not really ecological at all, but like social tolerance for wolves across the state of California and how that might affect recolonization of wolves is one of the things that I think is really, really fascinating. So we've talked a lot about this idea of doing statewide surveys to people and trying to figure out what that tolerance that they have is. And also, like when we talk about tolerance, there's a couple aspects of it. It's not like, do you like wolves or do you not like wolves? It's also understanding the acceptability of like management actions. What do they think about, different ways to manage wolves and different ways of managing prey populations related to wolves, et cetera. And mapping those surveys onto the state of California to figure out like, well, where could wolves be more abundant or less abundant? Where could they, maybe have a harder time, and where can we start to prioritize some of our conflict mitigation actions? That's the first thing that comes to mind. And I think that, when I think about like what kind of impact do I want to have for wolves and for people, that's I guess where I see it. And then the other one is something that we've flirted with a lot, but I think we still trying to figure out how we're going to do it is, California, when you think about California, and the natural world, like fire is a
Right.
huge determinant of what's been happening in California natural resources in the last few years. So understanding how wolves are
Right.
behaving around fire, how it could be benefiting it or not, them and their prey populations, I think that would be really cool to look at. But that requires some like pretty fine scale color data and some like, I shouldn't say lucky because we don't want fire, like sometimes you want fire to happen, sometimes you don't, right? But you know, having those all deployed before the fire would be a little bit of luck.
What about you, Mario?
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of constantly joke that I don't just want to write another mesopredator release paper or mesopredator suppression, but I do think that it will be really exciting to see what some of the impacts of wolves will be for smaller canids like coyotes and potentially foxes, red and gray foxes. So, and I do think that we're on a good timeline to kind of begin seeing what some of those impacts are. Like Matt said earlier, California Department of Fish and Wildlife has been collecting data on wolf recolonization to California for the past 13 years, and so we're kind of coming into this really cool data set that we're trying to kind of piece together from a bunch of different units within the department, and to the point where we can begin to ask like really cool questions because there's been so much work put into the California system before we got here. So it's like building on the legacy that others have left before us and seeing like what we can piece together, and just seeing how coyotes are responding, for example, would be really, really interesting.
So for either of you, Mario, I'll stick with you, or if Matt, please feel free to jump in if one knows the answer or not. Are there specific objectives, and I know numbers are not everything, meaning population growth, size, whatever it is, but are there targets that the California Wolf Project is sort of looking at as baselines as recolonization continues to happen, as the population continues to grow? You see the impacts on ungulates. Are there any of those things in sort of the pillars of the research, pillars of the project at this point, saying if we hit this objective population-wise, we're on track for these things to happen? Or has none of that really been established yet?
Yeah, I think that okay, I guess I this is going to be one of those questions for sure where it's going to be
It's fine.
tough. But and Matt, I don't know if you know any more of the specifics, but I know that California, because wolves are listed at the federal and state level, California has some different benchmarks for levels of for like decision making,
Right.
you know. And I think that California's are now in like whatever stage 2 is, but I can't tell you what stage 2 is. Matt, do you know?
Yeah. No, I can't remember what stage 2 is either. What I was just thinking is like, so like as the California Wolf Project, I guess like at us at UC Berkeley, you know, we're not looking at the population numbers as much. You know, that kind of all falls into the train of,
Sure.
of CDFW. And I guess what we're just interested in is like understanding like, you know, no matter what the population size is, what are we seeing on the ground and how is that affecting ecosystems and wildlife communities? But yeah, like I can never remember the numbers that they have for like, you know, the stages or like delisting criteria for California endangered species. So like I read the report like, and then I immediately forget that kind of number, unfortunately.
It's okay. And I mean, listen, we've learned over the course of time that we've been doing this that the numbers necessarily aren't the best benchmark anyway for any type of research. And the numbers on the page necessarily just, it's not great to make policy. So when you guys, that's why I asked the long-term question or even the short-term question is like, what is this about? What's it like for both of you to be working in this place where you have all these different stakeholders and agencies involved? Are you guys used to this type of stuff? It seems like you are, like you've come from places where you have to not answer to a bunch of different folks, but you all have to kind of work together to make things happen. Otherwise, you know, you're just going to be spinning your tires in the mud. Do you guys feel like this is sort of, you're easing into this a little bit better than most, or do you see any friction happening thus far? I know it's so early on.
I was just gonna say, I think it's like, Malia Burtis, who's our communications specialist, told us like, she put up that first Instagram post and it got shared like 3,000 times. And, every time something happens with California wolves, it's
Right.
in newspapers, it's all over the place. It's shared so constantly. And, with the rest of my work, it's like, old news, like who cares? I'm talking about like, I'm doing research on like wolves in Montana and
Old news.
next, and so it's really fascinating to see how much enthusiasm there is in California wolves, and I think that's really cool. It makes you excited about your research,
Right.
and other people are excited about your research. And as a researcher, you most of the time you're like nobody's that excited. Like I published that paper, and maybe a couple of people will read it, but that's about it. But in California, that's a different scenario, and so it's cool. Obviously, it's challenging when there's that enthusiasm can be on both sides, right? And that's I think that's what makes the job interesting for me. And we have to work with a diverse group of stakeholders and what they think about wolves, and that's all part of it. I think one of the things that, and Mario said this early on, is so like I love wildlife. I think that every species deserves to be on this planet, and like I'm committed to that. At the same time, I don't think that wolves are any better than any other species. I think they're all on that same level playing field, and just happen to work with large carnivores. But I also love pronghorn and elk and fish and all these other species. And so having a little bit of emotional distance sometimes can make those conversations a little bit easier, even though, sometimes it can still be shocking.
What about you, Mario? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's been a little bit of a culture shock to me, just to have to interact with so many different people. Even though I did interact with a couple of different agencies during my master's and PhD, and doing like international work, and it was always one or two different people that I kind of met with once a year, maybe, if that, or exchange a couple of emails. I think that Matt and I have collectively spent well over 1,000 hours in the past 6 months. I mean, that might be a little hyperbolic, but a lot of time just meeting the people that are a part of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, because it is such a massive entity. And we've also been talking with folks from different tribal nations. We've been talking with folks from the Forest Service. So there's definitely been this, and we've also been talking with folks on the ground. The stakeholders are actually living on the ground and living with these carnivores. So I think in that regard, it's been a little bit broader than anything that I've ever been exposed to.
What are some of the counties in California where this research is kind of focused, and in terms of your research? Because I mean, elk don't exist everywhere in California. Ranchers don't ranch in every part of California. So what are the sort of centers of activity or of research when it comes to wolves and their prey, I guess?
This is the test of our geographic knowledge of California. I mean, where we're working, so we're not working on wolves all over California necessarily at the moment. We're really focused on pack areas, because as we were saying earlier, this project began its planning phase like a few years ago, and so as we came in, like more packs are coming online all the time, and so we're trying to race to catch up. And so right now we're working in Siskiyou, Lassen, Loomis, and probably forget another one, Shasta. But their wolves are also down south in Tulare. We're working with CDFW to do some monitoring of that pack down there, the Alumni pack. And then as wolves are coming online in other areas, and there's 70 wolves right now. Next year, not sure how many there are going to be, but we're trying to expand our efforts to match that population growth.
What we're kind of considering our core study area is basically north of I-80 and east of I-5. So one of the big accomplishments that we had this year was setting up, I think, the largest camera trap grid that's been deployed in California at a given time. So we deployed 189 camera traps, and we're working with University of California, Davis to expand that grid by, I think, at least 100 different camera traps. So we're working with close to 300 different camera traps in that area, which is pretty expansive, and it covers a lot of where we're seeing wolf activity and where wolf activity has, historically been in California.
So speaking of new packs and I guess camera traps, is that how are new packs discovered usually? How does that generally transpire?
Yeah, there's a combination of things. So part of it can be from camera traps that we have out or the CDFW has out. Also public sightings, people from the public can see wolves and they can report it to CDFW. I'm sure we can include a link out there. And so CDFW will follow up on a lot of those and find out, for example, that there was a pair of wolves in an area that they didn't know. And then there can also be, CDFW staff might see tracks of wolves, have a direct sighting, and then follow up on it and do some more monitoring to find out where they are. And so I think that's how a lot of these packs have been found. And, and just in the last couple of years, like we're at 9 packs this year, we're at 4 last year. Next year, there's probably going to be some more. And so, getting ready to see that. And obviously, we in CDFW are trying to work to figure out how, so using the information that we gain, how can we figure out how we prioritize that monitoring effort to see where wolves are going to go next? Because sometimes this area is so expansive. And one of the challenges with California wolves is they won't set up home ranges right next to each other. They're like, no, I'm going to take off all the way down to Tulare County. They're really far away. And so because of that, that means that for our field team and CDFW, there's a lot of time in between those pack areas. So specialists are going in between, driving 4 hours to get from one pack to another.
Wow.
Right. We've always talked about how there's this established wolf pack that we're studying, and that we have collars on all the way down into Tulare County, and then the closest one is up by Sierra County, and there's all this space, and we all just look at each other like there has to be wolves in between that space.
Yeah.
And part of it is access, and part of it is where people tend to congregate and where research tends to happen, but we're hoping to start getting into those areas and seeing what's out there.
Yeah, and California mountains are really rugged.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it's easy to do research in a lot of it.
Yeah, there's some of those wilderness areas where we've kind of we've kind of just laid out a grid, this is where our ideal camera traps would be in California, and then we just go through and all right, these 100 cameras we can't do it just because it's going to be impossible to get to. Wow. And it's going to be under 20 feet of snow.
100%. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Totally. I mean, it's such a unique,
it's amazing
landscape now. Yeah. That the fact that this is happening here in, my home state now, that this is, you just don't think about it. Cause I think why, going back to what you were saying before, Matt, a little while ago about the excitement around it, is that when you don't have a species in a state for close to 100 years, and then all of a sudden you see one, and then there's 10, and now there's 70, it's a breath of fresh air for wildlife, for people who like nature, and they go, and it's a hugely outdoor type state, whether it's beach, mountain, snow, ski, whatever it is. So if people are out there and they're like, oh, I might have a shot to see not only bears and lions, but wolves now, it just sort of completes that triangle, which is pretty unique. I know for myself, it's well, if you could have wolf watching in California, you wouldn't have to go to Yellowstone. Not that I wouldn't go to Yellowstone to see them, but it brings a whole new dynamic to a state like this. Is there any bit of that sort of, like I said, I know it's work for both of you, but is there any other emotion that kind of comes up when you guys are doing this stuff that you, like I say, this is a ground up project, and now you're witnessing this recolonization in real time, that you guys are a part of laying the groundwork for, like you say, the next 5, 10, 20 years down the line?
Yeah, I think one of the perks of this job, obviously, and ecology in general, is just the incredibly beautiful places you get to go to do field work, and just walking all day, putting up camera traps, and then just stopping for a second and be like, yes, like this is what I'd want to do on a good weekend anyways, go on a long hike up in the mountains and, do something and then go back. And so I think that that's, really awe inspiring. And then, to fall asleep and hear some howls, is awesome, and it's a real feeling of wilderness, however we define that culturally, or, and all the things that come with it. But it is really exciting. It's really exciting to work in a field like this and get to visit those places.
I always, I oh man, ugh. I like to think about what the landscape would have looked like, 10,000 years ago, and just seeing the amazing diversity of wildlife, and like not just the diversity, but the quantity, like the sheer numbers of wildlife that used to be present in California, in the Great Plains, that um, you have all these species that were once here, and all of a sudden, for some reason, they're gone. Um, and to start seeing them come back, to start, like, wolves and bears and mountain lions, and all these, like, really large charismatic species that are really, really cool to look at. It's awesome for me personally to see that kind of stuff. And I try not, like, I get excited about, the snail darters just as much as the wolves, um but something about it's like this, like this guttural thing about seeing a large carnivore on a landscape. Like, man, we used to fucking compete with you
Yeah.
guys. We used to, like, duke it out over, like, carcasses, and just, like, I think that's so cool that these species are coming back, honestly.
We when we hire field techs, we usually tell them, like, don't
Yeah.
don't think that you're going to see wolves every day, because that's not how this works. You're not going to be in the field, like, waking up in the morning and at 8 o'clock you're drinking a coffee and seeing wolves out at the car window or something. But we recently hired this one guy, and on his very first day he saw a mountain lion while driving in the truck, and we're just like,
Yeah.
so lucky. Like, why isn't that us?
This last, because I'm working remotely, this last summer, I went down to California a couple of times. I guess I went to California a couple of times, and my second trip I went down, and I was working with the Region 4 wolf biologist, Chris Ditar, and we were just, like, following up, doing some scat collection. We were doing some cluster investigations. And on one of the long weekends, he took off, and I was just camping out by myself in this little meadow. Chris said, they used to have a rendezvous site, like, pretty nearby. I think there's, they're spending their time a lot, like, within 1 kilometer of this site. And just dead asleep in this middle of this, like, grassy field, and like 4 o'clock in the morning, I hear all this, like, yelping and shouting, like coyotes. And I was like, oh man, there's, like, these coyotes. That's awesome. That's really cool. That's exciting, for me. Like, that's enough. Like, and then I go back and I start looking at the GPS coordinates of the wolf. And apparently this wolf was the one that was collared, pretty much walked, like, within a couple 100 meters of my campsite.
Wow.
And I guarantee that these coyotes were going crazy because this wolf was there at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so
You're
cool.
right. It's just, yeah, it is. Just that presence stuff. I know Steven takes his, treks out in the woods and stuff, and it's a different mindset, and it's a different type of engagement that you guys are both involved in, just from the human and animal perspective, and to be a part of something that's so new and is going to be, like I say, hopefully funded and progressing for the next however many years, is just really exciting to be a part of for both of you. It's really, really cool and unique. And I can tell you, I know you both weren't. I don't think you guys were at the museum. If you were there, I didn't see you. But the amount of folks that turn out for Ronan's exhibit, for the panel, for meeting the wolf dogs that we brought from our sanctuary, there is an engagement and an interest from everybody, like you say, from all walks of life that want to learn more and are interested in the fact that this specific species is back and is recolonizing and is making an impact or will make an impact. So it's really, really cool to see that. For either of you, what is, obviously promote the website, but what are some different ways that people can either get involved with the California Wolf Project, see the latest updates, and find out what's happening with all the new research and all the things that are going on?
Yeah. So the best way to get involved or to hear about what we're doing is our website, which is wildlife.berkeley.edu/Cal Wolf Project. We'll make sure to put the link in the notes. But there we have a sign up page too, so that people can get regular newsletter updates from us. Those are going to start coming out this month, and hear a little bit more about our research. And we post also opportunities up there, whether it be for field techs or volunteering, et cetera, that are coming up in the future. And we're hoping to, communicate all our science and our updates there on the website as well. And then we have social media, and we're on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I think we're on Facebook, maybe. And so, people can kind of see some cool pictures from the field and what we're doing there too. But yeah, we're hoping to keep expanding and hopefully expanding our field team and having some of these events and being able to share this with people around California. Be really exciting. And so we'll be sending out emails to everybody.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have that stuff in the description for the podcast. So anybody who's listening, you can just click the link in the description and go for that. My last question for both of you, I'll start with Mauriel, and then I'll go to you, Matt. When you hear the word wolf, what's the thing that comes to your mind?
Oh, that's my dogs, maybe? No. I don't know. That's a good question. Do you want a single word? Do you want like an emotion? Like what is it evoke in me?
Whatever. I mean, you howled, so that to me is that's pretty good. So I mean, if that's what comes up for you, yeah, that's what comes up. Yeah. I love it. Matt, same for you. What's when you hear the word wolf, what's the thing that comes to your mind?
Sorry, that was unmuted. Mario answered first, and I still don't have a good answer even after having that extra time. And I think I think about a lot of things. A lot of experiences come to mind immediately, and sort of this idea of wilderness. And that debate in my head about what is wilderness, where is it that humans don't really have an impact, but still experiencing those places and thinking about what was this 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And so when I think about wolves, I think about that wild lands and that legacy of those wild places.
It's awesome. I mean, listen, Matt Hyde, Mauriel Rodriguez, thank you both for the work that you're doing. We'll obviously, keep everybody posted about the work that you both are doing and the team is doing for California Wolf Project. It's truly exciting to have wolves coming back into California. So thank you both for your time and all the information that you guys are able to give us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks, Steven. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate you guys. And let us know when you have an update and we'll do this again.
Yeah, once you guys have those papers done and you can relax, you can talk about some stuff. Hang tight while we sign off. How's the all out there? Be with you next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.